Because let's be honest, some things never change. You probably won't survive this morning without coughing a little. Between the dust, the heat, and the occasional whiff of slightly burnt crust, it's an ancient sensory overload. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bakery doors open to you like a secret. The floor is stamped earth, uneven under your sandals. Baskets spill over with pale flour, and sacks of grain lean against the walls, their tops twisted like sleeping cobras. The head baker, a wiry man with forearms the color of roasted dates, nods to you without stopping his work. He's already been awake for hours. The dough, pale and heavy, waits in long troughs like resting crocodiles. Historians still argue whether bakers started their shift this early out of necessity or superstition. But judging by the rhythm here, habit alone could explain it. You follow the rhythm: thump of kneading, the hiss as hot ash is brushed from an oven's floor, the rattle of a wooden paddle. Each sound is measured, like notes in a sleepy orchestra. The apprentices, younger and dustier, move in a semi-chaotic ballet. One spills a little water, another slips a loaf into the wrong oven, earning a low growl from the master. A loaf is pulled out too early, its pale top barely kissed by heat. The baker taps it with his knuckle, shakes his head, and sends it back. Bread, he mutters, is patient, if you are. You can't help but notice the same patience in his eyes, although it might just be exhaustion. Near the entrance, a small fire pit warms a pot of barley porridge. The apprentices scoop steaming spoonfuls between tasks, sharing bites like it's an unspoken rule. In the corner, an elderly woman sifts flour through her fingers, checking for husks. She's been here longer than anyone remembers, and rumor has it she once baked for a minor pharaoh, though she never confirms or denies it. The heat is constant, but the smells shift. First raw grain, then yeast blooming in the dough, then that moment when crust starts to brown, and suddenly the air feels hungrier. You think of your own kitchen back home and realize nothing, not even the best bread-scented candle, could match this. A stray cat whines between the baker's legs, dodging skillfully around swinging paddles and falling crumbs. Someone tosses it a small piece of crust, and it darts away to enjoy its prize in the shadow of the doorway. You notice a few other animals, small donkeys tethered outside, their baskets still half full of grain from the mill. By now, the light outside has shifted to gold, and through a gap in the wall, you see the Nile catching fire with morning reflection. Soon, customers will start to wander in. Farmers, scribes, maybe even a temple servant or two, each with their own preferred loaf. For now, though, the bakery is a world unto itself, warm, fragrant, dusty, and quietly alive. And you, somehow, feel like you've always been here. You stay close to the troughs as the day's bread cycle unfolds. The grain you saw stacked in sacks is no longer just grain, it's in the hands of a young apprentice who pours it into a stone grinder. The grinding stones groan in a slow, circular song, and with each turn, wheat kernels surrender into soft flour. You lean over and catch the faint scent of raw cereal, dry and nutty, and you realize how different it smells from the bread it will soon become. From there, the flour journeys to a low table where another worker sifts it, letting it fall like desert dust through a reed mesh. He hums a tune you don't recognize, something slow, the kind of song that might have been sung in this same spot 100 years ago. Historians still argue whether Egyptian songs in bakeries were meant to keep rhythm for the workers or to bless the bread. But here, it just feels like part of the air. The water comes from clay jars, kept in the corner. It's cool from the night, and when poured over the flour, it releases a faint steam into the already warm room. The head baker sprinkles in yeast, carefully, like a priest pouring wine for a ritual. You know this isn't just about food. In a land where bread is life, this moment matters. The mixing is heavy work. One man leans his whole body into the dough, folding it over and over, his forearms dusted white. You try it yourself, pressing down into the dough's springy resistance. It pushes back, stubborn but willing. After a while, the dough is shaped into neat, palm-sized rounds. Each one gets a quick stamp from a carved wooden seal, some with lotus flowers, some with the names of the temples they'll go to. A little branding never hurt, even 3,000 years ago. Near the ovens, an apprentice uses a long reed broom to sweep yesterday's ash from the floor. The ovens themselves are rounded clay domes, their mouths glowing orange inside. When the first batch goes in, the room shifts. Conversation softens, movement slow, as if the entire bakery is holding its breath for the moment the bread rises. The heat wraps around you like a thick blanket. Beads of sweat gather at your temple, sliding down your cheek. You try to step back, but the head baker calls you closer. He wants you to hear it. "The bread talks," he says with a grin. You lean in and listen. Faint pops and sighs as the crust forms. It's strangely soothing, like a campfire murmuring secrets. Some of the loaves are bound for ordinary households, plain, sturdy, and round. Others are meant for temples, shaped into intricate forms, like small pyramids or decorated with sesame seeds. In a corner, a scribe makes notes on a scrap of papyrus, tallying each batch and its destination. It's an early form of bakery inventory, minus the spreadsheet headaches. The apprentices rush to pull the first batch from the oven. The crust crackles as it cools, and the smell, it's enough to make you forget your name. A young boy, no more than 12, bites into a piece that's too hot, drops it, and then tries to catch it midair. He fails. Everyone laughs softly, even the head baker, who pretends to be stern for about 3 seconds. By mid-morning, the cycle repeats. Grind, sift, mix, shape, bake. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. You notice how every step overlaps. While one batch bakes, another is mixed, and another is being shaped. Nothing is wasted, nothing stands still. Out of the corner of your eye, you see an older man sitting near the doorway, mending a reed basket. He's not a baker, but he's here every morning. Maybe for the company, maybe for the bread scraps. You wonder how many lives orbit this little clay and flour world. Outside, you hear the first voices of customers arriving, their sandals scuffing the street. The air shifts again, not quieter this time, but expectant, like the moment just before a theater curtain rises. And the smell, now it's fully alive, rolls through the doorway into the waking city. You edge toward the cool jars against the bakery wall, and suddenly the morning turns fizzy. A young apprentice lifts a lid, and a soft hiss escapes, like a sleepy cobra deciding the drama can wait until noon. Inside the jar, a creamy starter slumps and bubbles, alive in the most unthreatening way possible. The baker grins at you the way someone grins at a well-behaved toddler. Our yeast, he says, as if introducing a relative who pays rent in deliciousness. You lean closer and catch that tang, apple skins, and warm grain, and something pleasantly barny, which feels like a quiet promise of crusts to come. Mainstream fact first. In ancient Egypt, beer and bread are twins who share a wardrobe. Both rely on the same microscopic party animals, wild yeasts, that drift in on air or snooze in the flour, so the line between brewing and baking is porous. You watch as a frothy scoop from a beer vat. Yes, the brewery is next door, convenient, like a modern strip mall where every shop sells carbs, gets gently folded into dough. The head baker says the starter wakes faster that way. You nod sagely, like you've always known this, even though 10 minutes ago you thought Levin was a city. A brewer wanders in with a shallow basket, really a woven tray, holding foam scraped from yesterday's fermentation. He looks like a man who wrestles amphorae for fun. As he and the baker chat, you pick up the real rhythm here. Dough feeds beer, beer feeds dough, and the people who make both feed a whole city that pretends not to be tipsy by lunchtime. Historians still argue whether Egypt's most common beer, a thick barley brew, was baked first as a kind of doughy loaf and then rehydrated to ferment, or whether separate mash methods dominated. Either way, every swallow and every bite start from the same bubbling cradle. A woman swishes past you with a reed whisk, laughing as she flicks flour off your shoulder. She points at the starter jar and tells you, quite proudly, that theirs is older than the youngest apprentice. A 12-year-old pet, she calls it. Quirky tidbit. Families pass down sourdough like heirlooms, giving it nicknames, feeding it with rituals, even tucking it under blankets on cold nights so the microbes don't sulk. You picture last winter's scene. One jar, 3 quilts, and an argument over whose turn it is to sing to the dough. Light joke 1. You resist the urge to suggest a lullaby playlist, lo-fi beats to proof and chill. Across the room, the brewer pops a stopper from a beer jar, and a caramel aroma slides into the air. Barley, dates, maybe a hint of coriander. He pours a measure into a clay cup for the bakers, and everyone takes the gentlest sip, like they're tasting for omens rather than getting an early start. You take a tiny mouthful and find it cool and slightly sour, with just enough sweetness to make your shoulders drop. The baker points out that workers are partly paid in beer rations. You look around at the smiling faces and suspect the HR department here has finally figured something out. The baker lets you feed the starter, a scoop of flour, a bit of that beer foam, a splash of water, cool as the Nile at dawn. The mixture relaxes into itself, and within moments, new bubbles stipple the surface. He shows you the test. Drop a tiny piece into a bowl of water. If it floats, the dough is lively. It bobs like a miniature papyrus boat, and a boy claps softly, as if he's been waiting all morning for this one buoyant miracle. You file it under ancient QA procedures and decide it's less stressful than a modern email chain. The brewery side hums with its own soundtrack. Ladles thumping, jars thudding, and the soft squelch of mashing grain. A second brewer explains, slowly, because you're busy falling in love with the smell, that their everyday beer is low in alcohol, but high in calories and nutrients. It's not a party so much as a liquid breakfast, a safe alternative to raw river water, and a reason the city runs at all. He gestures downriver. Soldiers, builders, priests, everyone drinks. You glance at the ovens, and it clicks. Beer for thirst, bread for hunger, and together they are civilization's most polite glue. A scribal friend appears again, reed pen tucked behind his ear like a fashion statement, and notes how many jars of foam the bakery receives each morning. Historians still argue whether such tallies were purely economic or held a hint of ritual. Was there a sacred ratio of beer-born yeast to flour that pleased certain gods? But the scribal math here is calm and practical. His abacus is in his head, his ink is steady, and he smiles the weary smile of a man who knows tomorrow's numbers already. You drift to the oven mouth, where someone smears a paste onto a test loaf. Beer thickened with barley starch and a scrape of date syrup, a baker's hack to coax color. The crust takes on a burnished hue, like late afternoon Nile water. The head baker breaks the loaf, and inside the crumb, you see small, even pockets, tiny caves where yeast breathed out its invisible carbon dioxide and made space for softness. He hands you a piece. You bite. There's almost a sparkle to it, a lively tang under the warmth. And you understand, bodily, that air can be delicious if it's trapped in the right places. Light joke 2. You consider opening an ancient pop-up shop, brew and chew, but the licensing paperwork in hieratic alone might take 12 dynasties. Better to watch another trick. An apprentice stirs a mash of leftover crusts into tomorrow's beer, minimizing waste and maximizing flavor, the kind of circular economy that today would launch a podcast in. He tells you smugly that even the cat benefits, licking a sweet mash off its whiskers like royalty on a casual day. The brewer, perhaps a poet at heart, says that yeast lives by breath and reward. Give it sugar and time, and it lifts everything. He winks and points at the drowsy apprentice in the corner. Some yeast are faster than boys, he says. Light joke 3 lands gently. The boy pretends not to hear and flips a loaf with theatrical professionalism. A small argument breaks out near the jars. Should the starter be stored warmer tonight or cooler? Summer heat has been unpredictable, and everyone has opinions. Historians still argue whether bakeries maintain dedicated warming shelves just for starters, or whether jars simply followed the most comfortable corner like cats do. Here, the solution is democratic. One jar stays by the oven, another sleeps by the door, and tomorrow's bubble race will crown a winner. You admire a system where data meets superstition, and both walk away satisfied. For a moment, your mind wanders to modern grocery yeast, tidy, dry, predictably polite, and you feel oddly protective of this lively, tangy, moody creature in the jar. It has history. It has flavor. It has mornings where it sulks and refuses to rise until bribed with sweeter flour. You think of the old woman who sifts husks with the patience of a saint and realize her gentleness might be the real secret: steady hands and a willingness to listen to dough that talks. Remember how the baker said it? The bread speaks. You're starting to understand the language. By late morning, the brewery sends over a final ladle of foam, today's last handshake. The bakers mix it into a special batch destined for a temple kitchen. Loaves shaped like lotus buds and fish scales, glossy with the same date-sweet glaze. The air grows soft around you. Heat, humidity, the hush that follows a well-practiced routine. And you picture this whole district as a warm lung, inhaling grain and exhaling comfort. If the city has a heartbeat, it's the thud of kneading and the sigh of yeast at rest. You step back to the doorway for a breath of river air. The cat saunters past, tail corkscrewed like a question mark, and you remember your first whiff of this room at dawn. Same place, new bubbles, and a secret you'll carry: that the quiet fizz in a jar can connect breweries, bakeries, and the very slow miracle of a city waking up full. You barely have time to brush flour from your sleeves before a quiet procession slides into the street. White linen, shaved heads, reeds of incense trailing a ribbon of fragrance that tries politely to outdo the smell of warm crust. Temple priests, solemn as stone statues on payday, pause at the bakery threshold. The head baker straightens, wipes his hands, and nods with the careful respect of a man who knows that some orders are for stomachs and some are for eternity. They unroll a neat strip of papyrus. Today's offering schedule: morning, midday, evening. 3 pulses in the temple's daily heart. Bread stands near the top each time, right after beer, right before meat and fruit. Mainstream fact: Egyptian temple rituals include standardized offering lists, replicated for centuries, with loaves prescribed by type and number. The scribe traces a reed pen along the lines, murmuring measurements. Tall conical loaves for the sun god, fish scale loaves for fertility, lotus bud loaves for rebirth. You watch the baker's eyes flick with recognition. This is choreography he knows by muscle memory. The shaping table turns ceremonial. Apprentices bring out carved wooden molds worn smooth by generations of dough. One is a shallow dish with radiating grooves, another a tapering cone, a third holds the rounded impression of a lotus. The dough that earlier burbled with brewery foam now behaves like a dignified guest, folding into patterns without complaint. You're allowed to try the lotus mold, fingers pressing the dough's cool skin into each petal line. When you lift the loaf free, it's a sleeping flower, pale and perfect. You grin, and a priest actually smiles back, briefly, like a solar eclipse at noon. The oven mouth breathes deeper. The baker brushes the floor with that reed broom you've come to admire, and the first sacred batch slides in. Conversation drops to a temple hush, and even the cat sits with unusual poise, tail wrapped like a question it already knows the answer to. The priest closest to you explains that bread for the gods isn't just food, it's presence. To offer bread is to say, "May you be sustained as we are sustained." Your shoulders loosen at the simplicity of it. You've seen inventory and breakfast. Now you see intention. A mainstream aside sneaks in with the heat. Temple complexes often maintain their own bakeries, granaries, and brew houses, miniature cities humming behind pylons. Today, though, this neighborhood bakery fills a special order, which makes sense. The temple cooks can't do everything, and the calendar is messy with festivals. Historians still argue whether every offering on long lists was delivered in literal amounts, or whether some were shorthand for categories, a ritual menu more than a receipt. The scribe here, eyebrows arched in eternal skepticism, clearly favors the practical view. He checks quantities twice and stamps the order with a seal that leaves a falcon pressed into damp clay. The quirky tidbit arrives on a low tray. A letter loaf, the apprentice whispers. Small reed stamps decorate the top, tiny marks that, read in sequence, will remind the temple steward which sanctuary receives which batch. It's not full writing, more like edible labels, proof that logistics has always been hungry work. Light joke 1. You imagine modern barcodes, but crunchier, being scanned by a very confused ibis. While the sacred batch bakes, a young priest begins a slow recitation, a sing-song that feels older than the bricks. It's an offering formula you may have glimpsed in museums. Something like 1,000 of bread and beer, 1,000 of cattle and fowl, spoken so the gods hear it fresh despite the centuries. The words gather in the warm air, bead on your skin, and somehow make the room feel larger, as if the temple door has opened invisibly right here between the flour bins and the cooling racks. The baker pulls the first lotus loaf and taps its bottom. Again, that conversational knock. The bread talking. The crust glows a soft gold, petals deepened by the slightest brush of date syrup. Another batch follows, this time the tall cones. One priest explains their shape is a rising flame, a nod to the sun's rebirth. Another mutters that the cones stack efficiently on offering tables. Historians still argue whether the conical bread molds found in ruins were primarily for beer bread or for ritual loaves. But everyone here treats the debate like an old family joke. You can be poetic and practical in the same breath. A subtle competition starts between apprentices decorating fish scale loaves. One uses sesame seeds to trace scales. The other scores them with a delicate knife. Light joke 2. The loser has to sweep the entire bakery, which, when you look at the flour dunes near the door, qualifies as a cardio program. The head baker pretends not to notice and then quietly fixes both loaves with 2 swift passes, the way a painter corrects a horizon with a straighter line. When the trays are ready, a priest produces a slender pot of perfumed oil. Each sacred loaf receives a dot at the center. Nothing excessive, just a sheen that will catch morning light on the offering table. The oil smells faintly of blue lotus and something resinous, a perfume that flattens time for a moment. Your mind drifts to tomb scenes, painted bread rows, stacked like little suns. A mainstream anchor. Offerings placed before cult statues are believed to be transformed by the gods Ka, their life force. Afterward, the reversion to mundane food means the loaves can feed priests and temple workers. You nod at the efficient theology. The divine eats first. Everyone else eats second. No crumb abandoned. The scribe lists every loaf as it moves from rack to reed tray. He murmurs temple names: Amun's East Chapel, Mut's Courtyard, Khonsu's Side Shrine, and the route sounds like a lullaby. The procession reforms. Incense curls again, bargaining sweetly with the scent of crust. The cat tries to join and is bribed to stay with a heel of yesterday's bread. Even sacred logistics bow to feline negotiations. Light joke 3. If cats wrote offering lists, 1,000 of naps would be canon. As the group departs, the head baker lingers by the door with you. He says the gods eat every day because people love every day, and love is inconveniently daily. It needs breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He gestures toward the ovens, now accepting another secular batch, and you catch the continuity, sacred and ordinary, kneaded with the same hands, rising in the same heat, cooling on the same reed mats. Maybe holiness is a temperature as much as a place. You drift to the back wall, where older wooden molds hang like a gallery: hearts, flowers, geometric fans. One is cracked along the edge and mended with a clever copper staple. The baker says his mother used it for festival loaves and swore the bread baked in that mold kept children from nightmares. Quirky tidbit number 2, and he's half smiling, half serious. You wonder if the comfort came from tradition itself, the way repeated shapes, repeated scents, repeated songs make the night feel less wide. As midday presses its hot palm to the roof, a second temple runner dashes in with an apology and a small change. An extra set fish scale loaves for a healing rite. The baker nods and shuffles the cue without breaking the rhythm. Historians still argue whether such late adjustments reflect spontaneous ritual needs or the chaotic truth of human scheduling. You decide either way, it's proof that even sacred calendars suffer from last-minute emails, just with more incense and fewer emojis. The new batch shapes fast, and this time you help glaze them. Just a whisper of date syrup, the brush barely touching the scored scales. The sheen turns each loaf into a quiet mirror. You inhale, and that familiar trio returns. Warm grain, living yeast, faint sweetness. Only now it carries a thread of sanctity you can taste, the way a room keeps a whisper after everyone has left. When the second procession exits, the bakery exhales. Voices rise again. The cat returns to normal cat priorities, and someone brings out a pot of barley porridge for an unhurried late meal. You cradle a clay cup of beer, watching steam from the porridge braid with oven heat. Remember the bubbly starter, your lo-fi beats pet. Pet? Some of it went into the temple batch. There's a quiet satisfaction in that, like knowing a song you hummed made it into the choir. A breeze slips through the doorway and grazes the cooling racks. Petal lines, neat scales, tall cones, all softening from sacred to shareable, from symbol to slice. You think of the city outside, its alleys and ferries and sunlit roofs, and you understand why bread sits at the center of so many scenes. It's a promise folded into dough. That morning will come, that hunger will be met, that even gods appreciate a well-browned crust. You scoot closer to the ovens, drawn by that orange glow like a moth who's done the risk assessment and decided singed eyebrows are a fair trade. The clay domes rise from the floor like tidy hills, their mouths dark and breathing. You feel the heat on your shins first, then on your cheeks, then somehow inside your teeth, as if the warmth has found a secret back door. The head baker taps one dome with a paddle, listening for a hollow ring that means the belly's hot enough. You hear it too, a resonant thrum, and suddenly you understand why people say ovens have tempers. This one feels cheerful. The next sounds like it woke up on the wrong side of the kiln. Mainstream fact anchors you. Egyptian bread ovens, tabans, and other mud brick or clay forms are preheated by burning wood or chaff inside, then swept clean so loaves can bake on the retained heat. No thermostats, just experience. A reed broom clears the ash, a wetted rag tames stray embers, and the floor gleams faintly, ready for dough. You crouch low and feel the radiant wave roll out. It's like the desert decided to sit in your lap. The apprentices have a choreography that would impress a chorus line. One opens the mouth with a curved paddle. Another slips in round loaves, flat loaves, a fish scale or two. The cat, possibly heat curious and definitely rule averse, inches near the threshold until the elder woman clucks her tongue and flicks a pinch of flour into the air. The cat reconsiders its life choices and retreats to the shade, tail spelling a grudging apology. You try the paddle yourself. The baker guides your hands, aligning the board with the lip of the oven. Your first attempt is chaotic. The loaf makes a brave leap, half spins, and lands sideways like it's trying to sunbathe. Light joke 1. Congratulations. You've invented artisanal lounge bread. The baker nudges it into place with 2 crisp motions, the same way a drummer corrects a beat without stopping the song. He assures you that even he still misplaces one now and then. You suspect he's lying for morale, and you appreciate the service. A low table near the ovens holds clay lids, simple discs with little knobs. The baker places one over a small flat round on the oven floor, then scoops hot sand around the edges using a narrow shovel. Quirky tidbit. In windy seasons, bakers insulate with heated sand to steady the bake, a sandy hug that keeps drafts from nibbling at the crust. You watch the sand creep like warm dunes around a sleeping turtle. The lid trembles slightly as steam tries to escape and settles back, content to stay. A minute later, he lifts it, releases a puff of fragrant vapor, and you feel like applauding a magic trick that smells like breakfast. The ovens talk in tiny sounds, crackles, a rice paper rustle as crusts form, an occasional pop, like a polite hiccup. You close your eyes and catalog textures with your skin. The oven's face hot as a sunlit wall, the floor gritty with flour dust, the paddle smooth from years of palms and heat. The baker murmurs that he knows the weather without looking outside. On damp days, the dough sulks, and the oven needs more coaxing. On windy days, he banks the fire deeper and closes the doorway curtain. Historians still argue whether some bakeries use chimney vents or simple door hangings to regulate draft. Here, a woven reed screen flutters like a dragonfly wing, and a boy adjusts it by instinct, no equations necessary. You try a different station, shaping small discs to line the dome's interior wall. A quick wetting, a firm slap, and they cling like happy lizards. The baker times them by story length, pull after 3 verses, he says, and begins an old tune about a ferryman who keeps dropping his oar. Light joke 2. By verse 2, You're convinced the ferryman is your spirit animal. The loaves release with a gentle tug, and you stack them on a reed tray, listening to their gentle crackle as cooling air runs its fingers across their backs. Heat etiquette becomes your new religion. Don't stand directly in front of a mouth unless you enjoy instant sauna. Don't crowd the broom when it sweeps ash. Hot ash behaves like a dramatic actor, needing space to express itself. Don't lean your paddle against the dome unless you want a paddle-shaped brand on your palm later. The apprentices learn the hard way, which is why everyone's forearms look like they've shaken hands with the sun. You dab sweat with a spare linen and watch steam ghost off your sleeve. Mainstream anchor returns. Fuel is precious. Wood can be scarce. Chaff, straw, and even dried dung burn fast and hot. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen joke you were absolutely not going to bring back, and you keep your voice down. But the universe winks anyway. Someone tosses a compact bundle onto the coals, and the smell takes a barn-adjacent turn for a minute. The bakers barely react. Heat is heat. Scent is temporary. Bread is forever. One oven is older, patched where the dome cracked last flood season. A copper staple bridges the fracture, neat as a surgical stitch. The head baker strokes the patch like a scar he respects. He says a good oven has memory, that after years, the clay learns the rhythm of a baker's hands. You ask if that's poetry or physics. He shrugs. Yes. Light joke 3. You decide to stop arguing with men who can hear temperature. The conversation drifts to the build itself. Clay mixed with chopped straw, then shaped over a mound of damp sand and left to cure. When it hardens, the sand is scooped out, and the first gentle fires harden it to a working shell. The elder woman adds that the first fire should be fed sweets, date bits, a splash of beer, so the oven grows up kind. That's the kind of instruction manuals you wish came with modern appliances. Historians still argue whether such feeding counted as household ritual or charming superstition. Either way, this dome hums with good manners. A delivery boy ducks in with a basket of kindling and fledgling gossip. The Nile's breeze is picking up, he reports, and a fishmonger down the lane swears he saw a crocodile blinking politely at customers. The bakers laugh and trade bets over whose bread will sell out first today. The salted rounds or the honey-glazed festival shapes. You notice the workflow flexes with the crowd. Rounds near the door for quick turnover. Cone loaves deeper in the heat where patience earns a better crumb. The scribe pops his head in, pretends to check numbers, really just inhales, smiles, and floats away like a man powered by aroma alone. You kneel to peer at the oven floor. The clay is pitted from thousands of slides, a galaxy of tiny scars that give the new loaves just enough grip. The baker shows you how he scatters a pinch of bran like sand on a beach, a little non-stick magic that also perfumes the crust. He breaks a test loaf. The crumb shows 1,000 tiny caves, the archaeology of gas and gluten in balance. You tear a piece. It's tender, warm, alive, with that friendly tang you first met by the jars. You swear it tastes like light slowed down. A younger apprentice, eager and only slightly singed, asks if he can try the sand lid trick. He overdoes the sand. then panics when the lid sticks. The baker takes his hands, steadies the angle, lifts with a slow twist, and the lid yields with a soft sigh. A small steam cloud kisses your face. The boy beams. Somewhere, a tiny badge of oven taming gets pinned to his invisible sash. Midday slants in, and the bakery becomes a mirage of waves. Heat from the domes, heat from the door, heat from cups of beer carried like talismans. You retreat 2 steps, then 3, and still the glow follows. A gentle reminder that daily bread is earned in degrees Celsius. Outside, the street shimmers. Inside, you can almost see convection currents painting the air. One final experiment. The baker slaps dough on the outside of a dome, a trick for thin, crackly flats that cook in seconds. They blister and freckle, a constellation map you could navigate by if you believed in edible astronomy. He brushes one with a smear of date syrup, tosses on a sprinkle of sesame, and hands it to you. The edges shatter pleasantly. The center sighs like a pillow. If naps were food, they would taste like this. You stand, flexing knees that feel lightly toasted. The ovens murmur, trays whisper, paddles thud, and the reed broom resumes its meditative sweep. For a time, you lose the line between your breath and the ovens. Both slow, both steady, both releasing what the morning built. When the head baker finally nods toward a cooler corner, you follow gratefully, palms tingling, eyelids heavy in the way only heat can teach. Remember your loaf phi starter and those temple lotus loaves? They pass through the same embered gate, kissed by the same sand, marked by the same tiny pops. Heat, you decide, is the city's invisible scribe, writing patience into every crumb. And as you watch the cat reclaim its boldness and creep dangerously close again, you realize that some lessons, like where not to nap, must be relearned daily. The oven breathes, you breathe. The bread, nearly done, answers with a soft, grateful crackle. You step out of the oven's glow and into the bakery's front space, where the air feels almost cool. Though after an hour by the domes, cool is just another word for less molten. The street outside hums with the start of market day. Sunlight spills across uneven cobblestones, catching on baskets, sandals, and the occasional chicken that clearly has no permit to be here. Just beyond the doorway, the market stretches in a lively braid of sounds and smells. Traders call out prices for figs, dates, and small piles of lentils. A fishmonger thumps his wares on a plank table in a rhythm you could almost dance to, if you didn't mind smelling like cat bait afterward. And weaving through it all are the bread sellers, mostly women balancing reed trays on their heads, their loaves still warm from the oven you've just left. Mainstream fact: in ancient Egyptian towns, bakeries and markets were tightly linked, with bread often sold fresh each morning alongside produce, fish, and beer. These spaces weren't just about commerce, they were the social bulletin boards of the day. You see it now. Neighbors pausing to chat, to gossip, to barter over who's got the better melon. The head baker's apprentice beckons you to join the bread runners for their first delivery. You fall into step with a girl carrying a tray of conical loaves, each dusted with bran. Her posture is perfect, her balance unshakable. You, on the other hand, are concentrating so hard on not dropping anything that you nearly trip over a goat nibbling at a stray cabbage leaf. Light joke 1. You whisper an apology to the goat, who ignores you with professional indifference. The bread sellers claim their spots like seasoned chess players. Some set up near the fig stalls, knowing that sweet plus savory is an easy sell. Others linger by the beer vendors, strategic cross-marketing since yesterday. A few simply walk slow loops, letting the aroma do all the talking. You watch one seller slice open a loaf to reveal a swirl of date paste inside, the gesture as casual as someone rolling up a sleeve. Closer to the center, the air is a buffet of scents. Fried fish sizzling in shallow pans, crushed mint in earthen bowls, honey seeping from combs laid out like golden tiles. The bread's aroma doesn't compete. It mingles, cozy and confident. The customers know where to find it. One woman trades 2 onions and a handful of coriander for a loaf. Another haggles for 3 flatbreads with sesame on top, the deal sealed by a shared smile. Historians still argue whether barter or coin dominated daily markets. Here, the truth seems to be whatever works today. You follow the apprentice as she makes change from a little pouch, small copper pieces clinking softly. Each sale is wrapped in a scrap of reed matting or a piece of worn linen, practical against both dust and sun. One elderly man buys a fish scale loaf, tucks it under his arm, and then stops to tell a story about how his father once swore a loaf kept him safe during a storm on the Nile. Quirky tidbit: some Egyptians carried bread charms, actual small loaves or clay models, believing they brought protection or luck. You look at the bread under his arm and wonder if it's lunch, talisman, or both. The apprentice slips into an alley where a small cluster of children waits. She hands each a slice, no payment exchanged. End of yesterday's bake, she explains with a shrug. The kids scatter, giggling through mouthfuls. Light joke 2. One boy yells best breakfast ever, with crumbs so enthusiastic they might qualify as confetti. Back in the main square, a commotion rises. A traveling storyteller has set up by a spice stall. You pause with the crowd, loaf in hand, listening to his tale about a merchant whose camel learned to count better than he did. The punchline earns a ripple of laughter that mingles with the hawker's calls. You think of the baker's morning rhythm: grind, mix, bake, and see its echo here. Buy, sell, trade. Both are performances, both feeding the city in different ways. The apprentice sells her last loaf just as the sun reaches its sharpest angle. The market shifts gears. Fish vendors packing up, fruit sellers fanning themselves, beer jars clinking as they're loaded for the afternoon crowd elsewhere. You catch a faint whiff of cinnamon from a nearby table, where a woman sells sweet pastries shaped like coiled snakes. Historians still argue whether such treats were everyday fare or reserved for festivals, but judging by the speed they disappear here, you suspect every day wins. You and the apprentice head back to the bakery with empty trays. Along the way, she points out her favorite stalls: a potter who etches tiny hippos into his jars, a herb seller who tucks rosemary sprigs into your sash for luck, a cloth merchant whose dyed linens ripple like bits of the Nile on a breezy day. The street narrows, shadows lengthen, and soon you hear it again, that warm chorus of ovens and voices. Inside, the head baker greets you with a cup of cool barley beer and a chunk of bread still humming with heat. You realize the market and bakery are a loop. One fuels the other endlessly, like the Nile's flood and retreat. Light joke 3. If bread is the city's heartbeat, then the market is its chatty neighbor who can't stop telling stories over the fence. You sink into a low bench, bite into the loaf, and taste the morning all over again. Flour dust, oven heat, street chatter, and the faintest ghost of mint from brushing past that herb stall. Somewhere outside, the market is folding up for the day. But here, the next cycle of dough is already rising, quietly preparing to feed tomorrow's gossip, barters, and lucky charms. You return to the shaping table just as a tray of ingredients arrives that looks suspiciously like a treasure chest emptied onto reed mats. Date paste glossy as polished wood, figs sliced into little stars, handfuls of sesame seeds, and a jar of honey the color of late afternoon. The head baker rubs his hands like a stage magician about to produce a dove, except the dove is dessert, and it's strictly invitation only. These sweets, he says, are for the high desks, scribes with tidy handwriting, officials with tidy sandals, and that one cat who has somehow mastered the art of being where the treats are. Mainstream fact to anchor you. Honey is Egypt's ambassador of sweetness, harvested from hives kept by temple estates and households. Dates and figs join in as everyday luxuries, and together they flavor cakes and pastries offered at feasts and festivals. The baker lifts a small jar of honey and warms it near the oven mouth until it loosens into silk. He says the jars with lotus stamps come from a garden farther up the river. You tilt your head as if you can taste the blossom in the air. A low bowl reveals something you haven't met yet: crushed tiger nuts, little tubers pounded with a stone pestle until they become a fragrant meal that smells like almond's earthwise cousin. He mixes the meal with date paste and a whisper of sesame oil, needs, then pinches the dough into coins and small pyramids. Quirky tidbit: some families make a sweet the way they make a lullaby, passed from grandmothers to granddaughters, with measurements like a palm of tiger nut and a song's worth of stirring. You catch yourself humming along, entirely willing to be adopted by any grandmother in a 20-meter radius. The molds come out again, but tonight they're daintier: rosettes, fish scales, spirals. An apprentice sets thin discs of dough into carved cups and spoons in a vein of date paste, then lays another disc on top, sealing the edges with a pinch that leaves a scalloped border. You get a try, and your first pastry bulges like it's holding its breath. Light joke 1. Congratulations, you've invented the world's most nervous tart. The baker rescues it with 2 elegant presses and calls it plump, which is bakery for "we'll pretend that's intentional." Over by the oven, a shallow pan warms with a skim of fat, the surface shivering as if it remembers wind. The baker places a few tiger nut coins in, and they brown fast, the edges taking on a caramel freckle. He lifts them to a rack and, with theatrical restraint, drizzles honey in looping threads that catch the firelight. A scribe, already waiting, quill holstered, priorities clear, inhales and closes his eyes the way a priest does at dawn. He offers payment, is waved off with a smile, and leaves a tiny poem anyway. A promise to balance the baker's accounts with a favorable note on grain allocation. You suspect this is how economies were invented: dessert first, spreadsheets after. Remember your loaf fi pet? The apprentice asks, pointing toward the jar where the starter dozes. A spoonful works into a sweet batter destined for thin, quick cakes, the kind that blister in a breath against the dome and then vanish into waiting hands. The tang plays this new role beautifully, a shy counterpoint to the honey. Historians still argue whether layered pastries, something like the whisper-thin stacks you'll meet millennia later, existed in pharaonic kitchens, or whether those pretty paintings are simply stacked breads shown artistically. Here, reality keeps to a gentler scale. Not 20 layers, but 2 or 3 soft discs separated by date sweetness, pressed and glazed until they shine like little moons. A tray of sesame appears, and you get recruited into Team Sprinkle. Your scatter pattern is exuberant. Light joke 2. You create the Milky Way. The baker wanted Orion's belt. He leans over, adds a firm, neat line of seeds down the center, and the pastry suddenly looks important, like it has somewhere dignified to be at sunset. At the back table, the elder woman, flour oracle, oven whisperer, probable saint, prepares something she calls reed boat bites. She rolls date paste with a filament of crushed coriander seed, wraps it in a strip of dough, and pinches the ends so each piece curves up slightly, like a papyrus skiff skimming a breeze. She dots each with a single sesame seed so they know where to look. You ask who they are. She says, hungry mouths, and you accept this theology immediately. A boy arrives from the river quarter with a message. A household of a city official requests an assortment: 4 rosettes, 6 boats, a dish of tiger nut coins, and 1 treat for the cat, which proves the state understands public relations. The baker composes the tray like a quiet painting. You notice he nests the sweets between folded leaves, perfumed faintly with something green and cool. He says leafy liners keep honey from gluing everything together into one ambitious dessert. Practicality masquerading as elegance. The defining feature of food that knows important people will be chewing it. Between batches, the room slides into a slower gear. Honey threads hang from spoons like sunlit spider silk. Pastries tick softly as they cool. You help grind another palmful of tiger nuts and realize the rhythm of sweets is gentler than bread. Less pounding, more coaxing. Remember the crocodile dung sunscreen you heroically chose not to try earlier? There's a whispered superstition that a smear of honey around the eyes attracts good dreams and keeps the sun from being rude. You do not endorse the recipe, but you appreciate the commitment to skincare through snack. The cat arrives as foretold, floating on its own platform of entitlement. It bypasses your nervous tart, inspects a reed boat bite, and, with a flick that might as well be a signature, claims a corner. The elder woman breaks off a plain, unglazed piece. Sweet is not for whiskers, and the cat pretends this was the plan all along. Light joke 3. You consider taking leadership lessons. A small debate sparks between the scribe and the baker over a spice jar. The label, faded by years of fingers, might say fenugreek, or it might say something that once pretended to be fenugreek. The baker adds a cautious pinch to 1 batch of coins. The change is subtle, earthy, a little maple-ish, and the room hums approval. Historians still argue whether certain imported spices were common enough for daily baking or reserved for tiny festival gestures. Your nose votes for cameos only, the way a star steps on stage, sings one golden note, and leaves the chorus to carry the song. A runner returns for the official's order, and the tray departs like a low, fragrant comet. You imagine a courtyard with painted columns, a quiet fountain, and a circle of dignified people trying not to lick their fingers in public. The baker, who is not remotely fooled by dignity, sets aside a second, humbler tray. A few boats, 2 coins, your rehabilitated tart, and a thin cake blistered on the dome. He pushes it toward the apprentices, who fall on it with the decorum of jackals in a sandal catalog, messy, enthusiastic, inexplicably polite. You taste the tiger nut coin at last. It breaks with a soft crunch, then gives way to something creamy and familiar. The honey lifts and lingers. The sesame pops like tiny punctuation. A bit of date catches on your molar, and for a moment, your entire skull is warm with sweetness. You take a breath through your nose, and it smells like a hive found a pillow. The baker watches your face, clearly grading your reaction. You nod, solemn as a temple statue. He laughs, and the laughter is dusted with flour. Near the doorway, twilight puts a thumbprint on the world, smudging edges into softness. The sweets destined for elite tables are gone. The children's hands are sticky. The cat has moved to power nap in a sunlit rectangle that has migrated to the wall. You help stack the last reed mats to dry. Honey threads cling and release with little sighs. The elder woman hums a tune about boats and moons. You hum along, because theft of melodies is not a sin when it's this gentle. Before the lamps are lit, the baker holds up one final rosette you somehow missed. He drizzles, sprinkles, and hands it over with a mock-solemn bow. You bite, eyes half closed, and the day's earlier heat returns in kinder form. Warmth without blaze, glow without glare. Remember how the oven spoke in pops and sighs? These sweets speak in murmurs, the language of plots between friends. And as your shoulders drop and your breath lengthens, you realize the city's appetite for sweetness is just another way it practices hope. Small, daily, and drizzled in honey. You find yourself back in the cooler end of the bakery, where a wide doorway opens to the river breeze. Beyond it, the Nile gleams like a ribbon of hammered copper, and a low barge nudges toward the bank. 2 men leap ashore, tying the craft to a weathered post, while others begin unloading sacks so heavy they land with a muted thud. Grain day has arrived. Mainstream fact: the Nile was Egypt's ultimate highway, carrying wheat and emmer from fertile upstream fields to urban bakeries and temple granaries. Without these shipments, ovens would cool, markets would thin, and the city's rhythm would stumble. You step closer as the baker greets the boat crew with the familiarity of people who've shared 100 dusty mornings. The sacks are heaved onto reed mats for inspection. An apprentice unties one, plunges his hand in, and lets the kernels fall through his fingers, small, golden, slightly warm from the sun. He nods approval. Another sack spills out darker grain, destined for beer brewing. Quirky tidbit: some bakers mix a fraction of barley into loaves not for flavor, but because it ferments faster in the heat. A shortcut for days when patience runs thin. You offer to help and are handed a sack corner. Together with a grinning boatman, you shuffle it into the storeroom. Inside, tall jars stand like quiet sentinels, their tops sealed with clay. Some are marked with temple seals, others with the bakery's own carved lotus emblem. Light joke 1. You briefly imagine an ancient reality show, grain jar swap, where chaos ensues if the wrong stamp gets delivered. The baker shows you how each jar is lined with chaff to keep grain dry and discourage pests. He points to a fine dust at one rim, evidence of a mouse who tried and failed to gnaw its way in. The cats, he says, earn their keep. You mentally add rodent control to the bakery's job description. Outside, the boat crew rinses their arms in the shallows, splashing each other with the kind of weary playfulness that says the trip was long but good. A boy from the boat offers you a slice of flatbread smeared with something peppery. Riverbank hospitality. You trade him a coin from your pouch, which he pretends to refuse before pocketing with a grin. Historians still argue whether small transactions like this counted toward official records or simply floated along as informal trade. The baker sets a small table by the door, laying out water jars and a bowl of salted cucumbers for the crew. Between bites, they talk about the river, how the current was slow this week, how the reeds near one bend are thick enough to snag a careless oar. One man swears he saw an ibis chasing a frog straight onto a fisherman's net, which sounds both improbable and exactly like something the Nile would stage for its own amusement. From the doorway, you watch the barge crew push off again. They use long poles, their movement so smooth it feels rehearsed. The boat drifts into the current, grain dust still in the air behind it. You realize that each loaf you've seen today carries a little of this moment. The river's pull, the weight of sacks, the slap of water against wood. The baker beckons you to a side corner where a smaller door opens onto a narrow alley. Here, 2 donkeys wait, baskets slung over their backs, ready to deliver grain to another bakery across town. One donkey wears a necklace of dried gourds that clacks softly as it moves, a charm, the baker says, to keep it from wandering. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some animals wore bells or bead strings not only for identification, but to remind them of home. Light joke 2. You consider trying the same strategy for that goat from market day. As the donkeys depart, a temple scribe arrives with a short list, grain allotments for tomorrow's festival bakes. He and the baker discuss weights, converting between baskets, jars, and something called a sack hand, which seems to be as much about the size of the carrier as the sack. You nod sagely, as if fluent in this ancient unit, while quietly wondering if sack hand could replace modern spreadsheets entirely. The afternoon light grows syrupy, and a soft hum rises from the riverbank. A fisherman mending nets, humming a tune that wanders in and out of the bakery's doorway. It blends with the thud of jars being sealed and the soft sweep of the reed broom. For a moment, you can't tell which sound belongs to the river and which to the bread. Light joke 3. You imagine a loaf-shaped boat, yeast-powered, slowly making its way down the Nile. It's probably not seaworthy, but it would smell amazing. The baker closes the storeroom door, sealing in the grain's faint sweetness. Tomorrow's bread, he says simply, as if that explains everything. And it does. You think of the boat crew, the donkeys, the jars, and how each grain has already traveled farther than most people will in their lives. And when you picture tomorrow's loaves, you know you'll taste the river in every bite. The bakery's back room, usually a quiet place for cooling racks and flour bins, is unusually busy. A pair of servants in crisp linen tunics step inside, carrying a polished wooden chest between them. Its brass hinges catch the late afternoon light, and you get the feeling this is not your average bread order. The head baker straightens, brushing his hands on his tunic before greeting them with a respectful nod. The chest is set on a low table and opened with the kind of care usually reserved for temple relics. Inside is a folded sheet of papyrus bearing the royal seal, and beneath it, a smaller, elegant box filled with delicate clay stamps. Mainstream fact: royal kitchens in Egypt employed highly skilled bakers, but certain specialties, especially festival or ceremonial breads, were contracted to trusted master bakers in the city. Today's order is for none other than the Pharaoh's table. The papyrus lists shapes and quantities with almost theatrical precision. 12 lotus loaves, 6 sun disk rounds, a pair of crocodile-shaped festival breads, for reasons that are surely symbolic but still make you smile, and several dozen plain rolls for the palace staff. Historians still argue whether such shapes were purely decorative or carried deeper religious or political meaning. Here, the baker treats each as both: beauty for the eye, sustenance for the spirit. The clay stamps are works of art themselves, some carved with tiny hieroglyphs, others with intricate geometric patterns. You're handed one to examine. Its surface is worn smooth from years of pressing, and the handle fits perfectly in your palm, as if made for you. Quirky tidbit: certain royal bread stamps were considered so valuable they were stored with other palace treasures, and losing one could mean anything from a hefty fine to banishment from the court kitchen. Work begins immediately. Dough is kneaded to a softer texture than usual, enriched with a splash of sesame oil for a silkier crumb. The apprentices hum a slow, steady rhythm, and you fall into step beside them, pressing the stamps into the dough. The lotus pattern leaves crisp petals. The sun disk emerges with a perfect ring. Light joke 1. Your first crocodile looks less like a fearsome Nile predator and more like a sleepy lizard on vacation. The baker pats your shoulder anyway. A happy crocodile is good luck. While the shaped loaves rest, the head baker mixes a glaze of honey and ground coriander seeds, explaining it's a palace favorite. He gestures to the corner where a reed tray holds dried blue lotus petals. A few will be crushed and sprinkled over the sun disks after baking. The scent is faintly floral, a little like walking through a garden at dawn. The oven is swept clean for the royal batch, every motion deliberate. Even the cat, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment, chooses to lounge at a dignified distance instead of weaving underfoot. The loaves are slid in, and the bakery seems to hold its breath. You watch the crocodile's ridges rise, the lotus petals spread, the sun disks swell like golden moons. As they bake, a palace steward arrives, tall and expressionless, his tunic marked with an embroidered cartouche. He accepts a cup of barley beer from the baker, an old courtesy between craftspeople, and surveys the work in progress. The head baker explains each shape in turn, half for the steward's benefit and half for yours. The lotus, rebirth and purity; the sun disk, the eternal power of Ra. The crocodile, the might and protection of Sobek, especially fitting for a ruler. You find yourself nodding as if these symbols were obvious from the start, though really, you're just impressed the dough cooperates so politely. Light joke 2. You imagine a royal feast where someone gets assigned the lizard-looking crocodile you made. Perhaps it will spark an entirely new legend about the pharaoh's gentle protector. When the loaves emerge, the glaze is brushed on while they're still hot, releasing a perfume so rich you almost forget to breathe. The blue lotus dust is sprinkled over the sun discs, catching in the glaze like constellations in amber. The finished breads are arranged in a reed-lined tray, each loaf nestled as carefully as a newborn. The steward inspects the tray, nods once, and places a small sealed jar on the table. Payment in the form of perfumed oil, a rare luxury. The baker accepts it with a bow, then tucks a smaller loaf into a side pouch for the steward's journey back. An unspoken tradition of professional respect. As the palace order departs, the bakery exhales. The apprentices return to their usual chatter. The cat reclaims its weaving path, and the ovens welcome the next, more ordinary batch. Yet, there's a lingering hum in the air, the satisfaction of knowing today's bread will be part of a feast lit by oil lamps and cooled by the Nile's evening breeze. Light joke 3. You think about starting a rumor that the pharaoh can't sleep without a loaf under his pillow. Who knows? Maybe in 3,000 years, historians will still be arguing about it. The head baker claps you on the back. Bread for the people, bread for the gods, bread for the king, he says. It's all the same work, but you just use a cleaner paddle. You smile, realizing you've seen bread as breakfast, currency, offering, and now, politics in edible form. And somewhere on a gilded plate tonight, your slightly dopey crocodile will take its place among symbols of eternity. By the time the palace order leaves, the afternoon light has softened into that golden, forgiving hour when even the busiest street looks like it's exhaling. The bakery, however, is not winding down, because tonight is a festival night. You hear the music first, a faint thump of drums and the jangle of sistra somewhere down the main road. The head baker glances at you and says, "Better keep your sandals on. We're about to get busier." Mainstream fact. Egyptian festivals were as much about food as about music or ritual. After the temple processions and official offerings, the city celebrated with public feasts where bread was often center stage, sometimes dyed, sometimes shaped into elaborate forms, sometimes thrown gently into the crowd. You step outside for a moment and already see it starting. Children darting between stalls, women with baskets of flowers, and the scent of roasting meat curling through the warm air. Back inside, the apprentices haul out an impressive variety of molds: fish, birds, geometric fans, and one shaped suspiciously like a bundle of reeds. The head baker explains that each shape is linked to a blessing: fish for abundance, birds for freedom, reeds for safe journeys. Quirky tidbit: during certain river festivals, loaves shaped like papyrus boats were floated downstream as symbolic offerings, though sometimes the neighborhood boys would rescue them halfway and eat them on the spot. You're assigned to help with a batch of festival rolls infused with fenugreek and brushed with date syrup. The scent is earthy sweet, with a hint of maple that makes your stomach instantly curious. The rolls are shaped into spirals, easy to hold, easy to share. Light joke 1. The baker says the spiral design helps them taste like they last longer, which is also how you feel about naps. At another table, two apprentices are locked in a friendly competition to create the most impressive bird-shaped loaf. One is going for a duck, the other a falcon. The duck ends up looking like a smug pigeon, but no one complains. It still smells heavenly. The falcon, on the other hand, has an unexpectedly fierce beak and a wing pattern so detailed it could be mistaken for carved wood. The elder woman nods her approval, which is basically a trophy. The ovens glow like festival lanterns themselves. Loaves slide in and out in a steady rhythm, each greeted by the hiss of glaze meeting hot crust. You're tasked with sprinkling sesame seeds over the reed-shaped breads, trying to follow the neat lines scored into the dough. Your hand slips once, sending a little avalanche of seeds tumbling across the table. Light joke 2. You tell the baker it's artistic drizzle. He raises an eyebrow, but lets it pass. Festival nights encourage a little chaos. Outside, the music swells. A group of drummers stops by the bakery to collect an order. Flatbreads stacked high, wrapped in linen. They're heading to the public square, where the dancing will go on long past moonrise. One drummer offers you a quick beat on his hand drum as thanks, the rhythm vibrating up your arm like a heartbeat you didn't know you shared. A boy bursts in carrying a bundle of marigolds, breathless from running. He says they're for decorating the festival loaves on the front stall. The baker tucks a few blooms between the breads, turning the display into something that looks and smells like an edible garden. Historians still argue whether decorative flowers at markets were purely aesthetic or if certain blooms were chosen for symbolic meaning. Here, the marigolds just seem to make people smile wider. You help set up the bakery's festival stall outside, a low table draped in bright cloth, baskets overflowing with rolls, spirals, and shaped loaves. A small clay lamp is lit at each corner, casting the bread in a warm glow. People begin to gather, drawn by both the aroma and the colors. Some buy loaves to take home. Others break them right there, sharing with friends and strangers alike. Quirky tidbit number 2. A young man tells you that during last year's festival, a group of dancers used bread rolls as impromptu tambourines, slapping them against their palms to the beat until the crusts split. He grins and buys 4 more, just in case history repeats. Light joke 3. You suggest he choose the sturdier spirals for percussion, but he insists the pigeon duck has the best sound. You make a mental note to never underestimate bread-based instruments. As night deepens, the square becomes a whirl of movement, dancers spinning, musicians weaving melodies, lantern light catching on gold jewelry and copper cups. Every so often, someone stops at your stall, coins or onions, or even a carved comb changing hands for bread. You notice the baker doesn't rush anyone. Each transaction is unhurried, as if the conversation is as important as the loaf. By the time the drums fade and the last lanterns are carried home, the stall is nearly empty. The remaining loaves are given freely to a few lingering musicians and a pair of children drowsy from dancing. The marigolds are gathered, some tucked into hair, others left on the stall like little suns for the morning. Back inside, the bakery smells faintly of smoke from the lamps, layered over the enduring warmth of the ovens. The baker sits for the first time in hours, sipping barley beer and passing you a spiral roll that's still warm. You take a bite, and it tastes of everything you've just seen: heat and laughter, music and glaze, sesame and fenugreek. The crust crackles, the crumb sighs, and your jaw moves slower than usual, as if stretching the moment could stretch the night. You lean back, hearing the last echoes of drums outside, and think, festivals feed more than the stomach. They feed the part of you that needs to feel part of a crowd, part of a rhythm, part of a city that dances and eats as one. And here, in the soft afterglow, with crumbs on your fingers and music in your ears, you feel exactly that. Morning drifts in the color of warm milk, and the bakery yawns back to life. A reed broom whispering along the floor, a paddle testing the oven's mood, the soft blub blub of your beloved lo-fi starter waking like a contented pond. Outside, the market is slow at first, stalls unfolding like flowers, but one corner is already busy, the barter lane. You carry a basket of fresh rounds to the doorway and pause, because this is where bread stops being only breakfast and starts being language. Mainstream fact first. For much of Egyptian history, daily exchange isn't dominated by coins. It leans on commodities and rations, loaves and beer, jars of oil, measures of grain, tracked by scribes in careful tallies. Wages for many workers come as set amounts of bread and beer. Households budget in loaves the way you might in paychecks and grocery lists. You watch a mason approach the stall with a coil of linen. The head baker squints at the weave, not too coarse, not too fine, and gestures to a pyramid of rounds. Linen crosses to bread, bread crosses to linen. The scribe scratches a note on a shard of pottery, the humble ostrakhan, today's sticky note, dusts it with sand to dry the ink, and tucks it behind his ear like a victory leaf. A fisherman arrives next, smelling heroically of his profession, cradling a net mended with pride. He wants 6 flatbreads for a niece's naming day and offers 2 tilapia and a promise of a bigger one at dusk. The baker agrees, but only if the evening fish is as smug as last time. Light joke 1. You privately rank fish by smugness too, with the pigeon duck from festival night still holding a suspiciously high place. Across the lane, a beer seller thumps down a squat jar and asks for rolls in exchange. Bread for beer, beer for bread, the city's favorite echo. The scribe notes volumes with tidy marks. A jar here, a loaf there, a slash for already delivered. Historians still argue whether these daily swaps were settled immediately or swept into monthly accounts managed by neighborhood officials. The practical answer is shimmering right here. People need to eat now, and ledgers can catch up later like mildly out-of-breath friends. Quirky tidbit wafts in with the dust. A woman produces a tiny clay loaf from a string around her neck, its surface stamped with a maker's mark. It's not food. It's a token, a bakery's "I owe you," redeemable for the real thing when the ovens hum. The head baker nods, recognizes the stamp, a little lotus with a nick, and exchanges it for a warm round. Gift cards, ancient edition. You roll the cool token in your palm, surprised how the memory of bread can be shaped like a pebble. Closer to the stall, negotiations bloom like the lotus molds you pressed yesterday. A herdsman angles for a tray of rolls with sesame, promising a kid goat at month's end. The baker counters, one tray now for a goatskin later, plus a small lump of clarified fat for the pastry station. Light joke too. You almost blurt, throw in goat babysitting, but the herdsman's eyebrow says he already did that at dawn. Somewhere behind you, the cat sniffs the air at the word fat, then performs a disinterested stretch that fools absolutely no one. You notice how the baker translates value across smells and textures. A measure of fine ground flour buys more than a sack of bran. A fresh jar of coriander oil pulls more weight in the sweet corner than two armfuls of firewood. He pinches a seam on a roll, inspects the gloss of a jar's lip, tastes a dot of honey with a strictly professional face that fools you less each time. In this economy, fingers and tongues are calculators. The oven sets the exchange rate. Mainstream anchor. Again, records from workmen's villages list rations as daily entitlements. So many loaves, so many jars of beer, adjusted for rank, task, and festival bonuses. You picture a foreman doling out bread after a long shift, checking names while a scribe tallies behind him. The scribe at your elbow today murmurs that shortages twist everything. When grain stores thin, loaves shrink, tempers rise, and barters grow more complicated. Historians still argue whether standardized loaf sizes held in hard times or whether shrinkflation sneaked in under the reed mat. Your tongue recalls last week's slightly smaller crusts, and you suspect the gods themselves couldn't legislate a perfect crumb during a poor flood. A potter shuffles up with a neat stack of shallow dishes, faint hippos scratched into the rims. He wants bread for his kiln crew at midday, plus something sweet if the tiger nut stock isn't being hoarded by saints. The baker bargains gently. A dozen rounds for the dishes and 3 reed boat bites if the next batch bears the bakery's lotus mark. Quirky tidbit number 2. He calls it advertising, though the word he uses is more like making your name walk. You imagine the plates traveling dinner to dinner, your stamp tagging along like a shy but persistent rumor. Light joke 3. A young courier tries to pay for a spiral roll with news. Apparently a crocodile, not your dopey festival one, a real one, lounged behind the fishmonger's stall and nodded at customers like a shopkeeper. The baker offers half a roll for the headline, whole roll for corroboration. 2 witnesses later, the courier walks away chewing, triumphant, and you conclude that journalism has always had a snacks budget. Back at the counter, a woman in a faded blue sash places 3 small copper pieces beside a cloth bundle. Coins do circulate, just not everywhere, not all the time. The baker weighs the metal in his palm, then unties the bundle to reveal dried fenugreek and a handful of mint. He smiles and returns 1 copper. Fair is fair, then slips the herbs toward the pastry table. You inhale. The mint seems to clean the morning, like opening a window in your brain. The scribe pauses long enough to straighten his reed pen and mutter about Daban weights and conversions, a math river that runs beneath all this bartering. He sketches a tiny scale on his shard, the balance that lives in his head, and you marvel that a city can be counted in loaves, oils, cloth lengths, and promises that actually hold. Historians still argue whether every household understood these conversions or relied on market experts. Watching the gestures here, pinch, nod, taste, you suspect expertise is a communal animal that wanders freely and leaves tracks anyone can follow. A boy tugs your sleeve, eyes big, with a mission that probably started as mischief. He offers a carved comb in exchange for a sweet. The elder woman studies the comb's teeth, not bad. The carved fish, a bit wobbly. And the boy's posture, absolutely unrepentant. She grants him a half rosette and keeps the comb, tucking it into her hair with the dignity of a queen who knows where her crowns come from. Work for sweetness, she tells him. He beams, a lesson baked and eaten in one bite. By late morning, the barter lane hums like a hive. A builder secures tomorrow's breakfast with a promise to fix the bakery door hinge. A reed mat weaver earns rolls for fortifying the doorway screen against the rude wind. The beer seller returns with a ledger-settling jar, cool and beaded with condensation like a blessing. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen joke you bravely holstered? A desert trader swears by a cousin recipe, oil, ochre, and ground fenugreek. Keeps the sun polite, he winks. You decide once again that your skincare routine will remain enthusiastically imaginary. In a quiet moment, the head baker leans beside you and watches the lane without speaking. Bread leaves in hands, in baskets, on heads, and occasionally in mouths that promise to wait until home. He says the city spends the morning talking in trades and the afternoon explaining those trades to spouses. You laugh, thinking of households across town untying bundles. We have dinner, a new dish, 2 stories, and a rumor credited to a cat. The cat, never far from accurate billing, chooses that moment to leap onto the counter, curl around the scribe's inkpot, and look like collateral. The last trade before midday comes with a soft jangle, a string of tiny bells for the donkeys. You remember the gourd necklace charm and nod vigorously. The baker swaps 2 flatbreads, then ties one bell to the stall post for luck. It tinkles each time a breeze visits, a small sound that threads through heat and chatter like a cool idea. When the lane thins, the baker counts what the morning brought. Oils shine, cloths whisper, dishes cool rim, herbs clean breath, and a ledger of debts and credits that makes sense to everyone who ate. He presses a round loaf into your hands, payment perhaps, or just the currency of companionship. The crust crackles, the crumb breathes, and as you bite, you can taste the market's arithmetic. Fish for flour, linen for glaze, bells for quiet, stories for sweetness. Value, you realize, is as warm as a fresh loaf and just as negotiated. The hum of the barter lane fades as the sun climbs, and the bakery's back room fills with a quieter sort of bustle. The head baker waves you toward a low bench near the ovens where 3 men are sitting in a loose circle, reed cups of barley beer in hand. They are not customers. They're colleagues, other bakers from nearby streets, here for what the head baker calls guild talk. Mainstream fact. In ancient Egypt, skilled trades were often organized into tight-knit groups, guilds in all but name, that controlled quality, pricing, and training. Bakers, especially those producing for temples or the palace, kept close watch on their craft's reputation. You can see it now in the way these men sit, comfortable with each other, but always measuring. One, with arms like kneaded rope, talks about a customer who swore his bread was lighter than air. Another counters with a boast about shaping 200 festival rolls in a morning without losing a single sesame. The head baker laughs, pouring more beer. Quirky tidbit. Bakers sometimes staged friendly competitions, offering free rolls to whichever apprentice could produce the most uniform loaves in an hour. You picture the flour storm that must create, and you're slightly disappointed it isn't happening right now. The conversation shifts to prices. The first man complains about grain costs creeping up after a weak flood. The second warns that lowering loaf size will cause muttering in the market. Historians still argue whether loaf dimensions were regulated by law or by community expectation. Here, the consensus seems clear. Shrink a loaf too much, and the neighborhood will notice before the next sunrise. Light joke 1. You suggest baking a hollow loaf to save grain. The head baker shoots you a look that says, "Do that, and you'll be kneading dough in a basement in Nubia." A younger baker, new to the circle, nervously mentions an idea he's been testing. Adding ground lentils to stretch the flour. The others nod thoughtfully. The head baker says it's clever for lean years, but the flavor must be right. They talk through ratios as if discussing a family secret, half fact, half superstition, until the elder woman, passing by with a tray, drops her own verdict. If I can taste the lentils before the grain, it's soup, not bread. They laugh, but the respect is clear. She's seen more dough than anyone here, and her word carries weight. Quirky tidbit number 2. In some workshops, women held senior baking roles, especially in managing starters and supervising temple orders. You can believe it, this woman's eyebrow alone could probably regulate bread prices across the district. The talk meanders to training apprentices. One baker grumbles about a boy who keeps dropping paddles. Another brags about his nephew shaping rolls faster than the cat can swipe them. The head baker says he trains his apprentices to listen to the dough, which makes the younger man frown. "Dough talks?" he asks. The head baker shrugs. "It tells you when it's tired. You just need to learn its language." You think back to the faint pops and sighs from the oven and decide maybe you're learning that language yourself. Light joke 2. You consider suggesting a dough dictionary, but suspect it would be mostly blank pages with crumbs in between. A scribe appears at the door, different from the market tally man, carrying a small tablet. He sits with the bakers and reads out grain prices from different districts, news of a minor theft at a riverside granary, and a rumor that one palace baker has been accused of using inferior barley. The circle murmurs at that last one, each man clearly aware of how fast such stories can spread. The head baker leans over to you and says, "Reputation travels faster than a hungry cat. You've seen enough of the city to believe it." They turn to the matter of temple orders. One baker mentions a priest requesting bread, stamped with a new emblem, 2 herons facing each other. The head baker jokes that soon they'll be asked for bread, shaped like entire temples. Light joke 3. You say you'd eat the pylon first. It looks the most crunchy. The guild talk drifts into a more relaxed pace, cups refilled, bread broken into pieces for sharing. The bread is simple, no glaze, no seeds, but still warm, with a crust that sings faintly as it cools. They trade stories of customers, floods, and the occasional delivery mishap. One man tells of a boat that capsized mid-river, scattering loaves into the current. Children along the bank dove in to catch them, calling it the day bread rained sideways. Historians still argue whether these informal gatherings counted as official guild meetings or were simply neighborly check-ins. Whatever the label, it's clear this circle runs on equal parts camaraderie and accountability. If one baker's bread falters, they all feel the tremor. As the men leave, the head baker hands each a wrapped loaf, payment for their news and company. The last to go is the younger man with the lentil idea. The head baker clasps his shoulder and says, "Bring your best batch next time. We'll taste, not talk." You can tell it's both an invitation and a challenge. When the bakery settles again, the head baker looks at you. "We keep each other honest," he says simply, brushing flour from his hands. And you realize that for all the solitary work, kneading, shaping, tending ovens, baking here is never really done alone. The next morning feels different before you even step outside. The air has that dry, restless edge, and the baker's forehead has a crease in it before the first loaf is shaped. A temple scribe arrives early, scroll in hand, and speaks in a low tone that even the cat respects. The Nile's last flood was weaker than expected, and the grain storehouses are showing it. Mainstream fact: ancient Egypt's bread supply was tied directly to the Nile's annual inundation. A low flood meant smaller harvests, tighter rations, and a delicate dance between keeping the city fed and keeping tempers calm. Historians still argue whether officials rationed proactively at the first hint of shortage or waited until the scarcity was undeniable. Here, the worry is immediate and practical. How to stretch the grain without stretching it so far that bread loses its soul. The head baker gathers his apprentices around. They talk about flour mixes, more barley, less emmer, and smaller loaf molds. Quirky tidbit: in some years, bakers subtly change the loaf shape when reducing size, so customers wouldn't notice the smaller portion at first glance. He pulls out a slightly narrower cone mold, turning it in his hands as if weighing both clay and conscience. You offer to help sift, but the flour bins tell the story in every scrape of the scoop. The bottom shows sooner, the sound is sharper. Outside, a grain delivery arrives from upriver, but it's half the size of last week's. The sacks are handled with an almost ceremonial care, each jar sealed as if it holds gold. Light joke 1. You half expect someone to post a guard with a very stern loaf in hand. The first batch of dough is softer, wetter, bulkier with air to make up for less grain. The baker says it's a trick for keeping loaves looking generous, though the flavor will tell the truth to anyone paying attention. He tests a round in the oven. It rises cheerfully enough, but when broken open, the crumb is looser, more open. The apprentices exchange glances. They know the regulars will notice. By mid-morning, the market starts to buzz with its own version of the news. A fishmonger mutters about smaller rolls. A linen seller warns of rising beer prices. A woman in a green sash marches into the bakery holding yesterday's loaf, accusing it of shrinking overnight like a frightened tortoise. The baker listens patiently, replaces it with a fresh one, and slips an extra roll into her basket. Sometimes, diplomacy is shaped in dough. A temple runner arrives with a revised order. Fewer loaves for the midday offering, more for the distribution to the poor. The baker nods. Quirky tidbit number 2. Temples often acted as safety nets during shortages, redistributing bread to those in need. But the bread still had to come from somewhere, and that somewhere was usually the neighborhood bakeries. You can see the head baker already recalculating in his mind, adjusting oven schedules and dividing dough in invisible lines. Light joke 2. An apprentice suggests baking giant loaves to cut into smaller portions, so they'll feel bigger. The baker raises an eyebrow and asks if he'd also like to invent the world's first edible illusion show. You join in shaping the smaller festival loaves for a wedding later that day, pressing the stamps a little deeper to make the designs stand out on the reduced surface. The glaze is brushed on generously. It's a way of giving the eye something to feast on when the stomach might notice less. The cat prowls near the trays, perhaps sensing that scraps will be fewer. Even it seems to tread lighter. By afternoon, the temperature outside has climbed, and the marketplace is sharper, quicker in its exchanges. Trades happen with fewer words, more pointed gestures. You overhear 2 merchants debating whether to stockpile flour now or wait for prices to settle. A scribe scratches notes on an ostrakhan, shaking his head like a man trying to write with a dull reed. Historians still argue whether hoarding was frowned upon or simply part of the survival playbook. A delivery from the river arrives, smaller still, and one sack has a tear. A thin stream of grain spills onto the mat before it's tied off. The baker crouches to gather each handful back into the sack. Not one grain wasted, he says. You think of the many hands that have touched each kernel. Farmer, porter, sailor, baker, customer. The weight of it feels heavier than the sack itself. Light joke 3. You suggest writing each grain's name on the jar to keep track. The baker smirks and says if you start, you'll still be at it when the flood returns. As the sun dips, the day's loaves are counted, recorded, and set aside for delivery. There's less on the racks than usual, but each loaf looks as though it's been given extra attention. Glaze brushed just right. Seeds placed neatly, edges trimmed smooth. It's not about hiding the shortage. It's about making the bread's dignity last as long as the flour does. The baker leans against the doorway, arms folded, watching the street. We've done this before, he says quietly. The river gives, the river takes. We keep the ovens warm and the people fed. You nod, understanding that here, bread is more than food. It's resilience, patience, and the silent promise that tomorrow there will still be something warm to share. The bakery is quieter now, the evening crowd gone, and the ovens cooling to a deep, steady warmth. You're perched on a reed mat near the shaping table when the head baker gestures for you to follow him to a corner you haven't explored yet. It's a narrow shelf lined with small clay figurines and curious bundles wrapped in faded linen. These, he says, are the charms. Mainstream fact: bread in ancient Egypt wasn't just food, it was part of daily magic. Loaves could be placed in tombs to feed the dead, molded into symbolic shapes for protection, or blessed during ceremonies to guard the living. Historians still argue whether the charms in bakeries were serious rituals or comforting traditions passed down through habit. The baker unwraps a bundle to reveal a tiny loaf baked hard as pottery, stamped with a falcon. This one, he says, goes to sailors before they leave. Another charm, shaped like a coiled snake, is meant to protect against pests. Quirky tidbit. Some charms were deliberately burnt on one side to scare away bad luck, an idea that makes you glance nervously at the ovens. On the wall hangs a string of dried herbs, coriander, mint, and a few sprigs of something you can't name. For the starter jar, the elder woman explains as she shuffles in, keeps it lively. She taps the jar affectionately, as if greeting an old friend. You remember the lo-fi starter bubbling in its pot and wonder how much of its personality comes from microbes and how much from the people who talk to it. The baker shows you another tradition, pressing a thumbprint into the bottom of a loaf before baking, a way to mark it with the baker's own luck. Light joke 1. You ask if a baker with bad luck should use someone else's thumb. The elder woman narrows her eyes and tells you to stick with your own fortune. On a low shelf sits a clay model of an oven, no bigger than a pigeon. Inside are crumbly little loaves, offerings for the afterlife. From a tomb, the baker says, someone wanted to bake forever. He doesn't smile when he says it, more a quiet nod to the fact that bread crosses every boundary, even the one between life and death. In the corner, a young apprentice is carefully shaping tiny discs of dough, each no larger than a coin. He sprinkles them with sesame and sets them on a tray apart from the main batch. For the threshold, he says when you ask, he'll place them at the bakery's entrance tonight, an offering to keep prosperity flowing in and trouble out. Quirky tidbit number 2. In some neighborhoods, households would feed their doorways at the new moon with bread or beer. Light joke 2. You imagine a modern landlord insisting you pay rent in sesame biscuits and think the world might be better for it. The baker picks up a round loaf studded with dried figs. Love bread, he says simply. These are given to couples on their wedding day, the figs symbolizing sweetness and many seeds for many children. He tells you about a couple from years ago who returned every anniversary for another loaf from the same mold. Still together, he says, though they now have more children than I have apprentices. From a high hook hangs a small reed basket filled with blackened crusts. Old festival bread, the elder woman says, never thrown out. It's luck for the year ahead. She crushes a piece between her fingers, letting it fall into a pot of dough. The baker winks, a little of the past in every loaf. You can't decide if that's superstition or the most poetic starter recipe you've ever heard. In the midst of this charm-filled corner, a temple boy arrives with a request, a loaf shaped like a jackal, to be placed in a funerary offering. The baker nods, pulling out a mold you haven't seen before, long, lean, with pointed ears. He fills it carefully, brushes the dough with oil, and scores a pattern along its back. When it's done, it will sit beside jars of beer and cuts of meat, feeding a spirit on its journey. Light joke 3. You whisper that if you were a spirit, you'd haunt whichever bakery sent you the best bread. The elder woman pats your arm. You wouldn't be the first. The loaves in the oven now are a mix of the ordinary and the magical. Bread for dinner tables, bread for blessings. The cat prowls near the threshold biscuits, tail twitching, as if deciding whether luck should be chased or lured. Outside, the street has quieted. The festival drums are only a faint echo now. The baker wraps a small charm loaf in linen and presses it into your hands. For your travels, he says. It's a simple round with a spiral scored on top, meant for safe return. You feel its warmth even through the cloth. As you tuck it away, you realize that here, bread is not just food, not just trade. It's a conversation with forces seen and unseen, a daily thread between what you can taste and what you can only hope for. And tomorrow morning, the ovens will heat again, feeding both. Sun leans low over the alley, painting the bakery wall the color of toasted crust. You stand in the doorway a moment, squinting into the amber light, and feel the day begin to fold itself neatly, like linen set aside for tomorrow. Inside, the ovens glow with a calmer heart, no longer roaring, just breathing, while the reed broom resumes its soft mantra across the floor. A few last loaves whisper as they cool, their tiny pops like polite farewells. You catch yourself answering under your breath, as if the bread could hear, "Good work, see you in the morning." The head baker tallies on a shard of pottery while the scribe reads figures back, a duet of numbers and nods. Mainstream fact, end of day counts, loaves sold, loaves pledged, grain spent. Often lived on ostraca, those humble potsherds that outlast papyrus in the dirt. You picture some future hand digging up today's math and learning that on this evening, sesame outpaced spirals and one particularly dignified falcon loaf was returned because the buyer decided his guests were more duck people. Light joke one, you vow to live a life where you, too, can describe friends by bird pastry preference. Near the ovens, the elder woman shakes out the reed mats. Crumbs patter like warm rain, and the cat patrols beneath with the gravity of a seasoned inspector. She slides a shallow pan of water toward the dome's mouth to pull the heat down slowly. No abrupt chill. Even Clay dislikes rude goodbyes. She hums that ferryman's song you timed earlier, and you find the verses have lengthened in your memory, stretching like evening shadows. Remember the crocodile dung sunscreen you heroically skipped? The song assures sailors that the river will be polite if sung to, which sounds only slightly more scientific than that skincare tip. Apprentices settle into a different pace, unhurried, careful. They scrape paddle handles, oil wooden stamps, and wrap the most delicate molds in cloth so the night air won't warp them. One ties a bell onto the storeroom latch, the same small jingle you traded for in the barter lane. Quirky tidbit. Some bakers tucked a sliver of yesterday's cooled crust into the hinge of the door to bring the dawn back. A superstition, half practical. It discourages pests. And half poetry. It invites tomorrow. The elder woman does it now. A small, practiced motion that feels like a prayer, even if no God is named. Across the room, the head baker pins a scrap of linen on the wall. Tomorrow's plan, drawn in quick marks. Quantities, shapes, the temple runner's revised schedule, and a reminder to try the younger baker's lentil ratios on exactly 12 rolls, not 13. We tempt dough, not fate. Historians still argue whether night baking dominated or bakers preferred pre-dawn starts. But here, the compromise rules. A short, watchful night, with starters fed at intervals and ovens dozing like warm animals who need an occasional pat. You make the evening rounds with him. In the grain room, He taps each sealed jar, listening for fullness the way another man might judge a melon. In the starter's corner, he opens the jar and gives it a stir. Your lo-fi pet stretches awake, bubbles shouldering through the surface as if it heard the drumbeat from last night's festival and wants an encore. He adds a whisper of flour, a sigh of water, a fingertip of beer foam, the last from a jar that's already sweating evening cool, and checks the float with the tiniest crumb. It bobs, triumphant. Light joke too. You salute the crumb as captain, and the baker pretends not to smile. A boy enters with a tray of guards' rations for the night watch. Flatbreads, a few tiger nut coins, and a small jar of cucumbers. The city's gates still need mouths to chew and eyes to see. Mainstream anchor, workers across Egypt, from quarry gangs to gatekeepers, often received rations pegged to time and task. The quiet choreography of feeding them is what keeps streets safe and projects moving. The head baker adds 2 extra plain rounds to the tray. For the man who always gives the cat water, he winks. Kindness has an exchange rate here too. By the threshold, an apprentice kneels to lay those tiny sesame coins you watched him shape. Doorway offerings against mischief. He whispers the quick charm under his breath. Words that sound like sand and river and sky agreeing to behave. The cat peers at the coins, decides luck tastes like sesame, and is gently redirected. Light joke 3. The elder woman declares the coins are for spirits and landlords, and the cat, being neither, is offered a crumb of last night's plain crust. It accepts with the long-suffering dignity of underpaid staff. You step outside for air that tastes less of ovens and more of evening. The alley has softened to charcoal edges and copper glints, a few lanterns bobbing like lazy stars. Someone down the way plucks a 3-string lute. Another voice joins at half volume, as if to not startle sleep. A ferryman parks his pole by a wall and cradles a loaf under his arm, quiet as a promise. The river, now black glass, carries a small barge whose lamp paints a gentle path. Grain going out, fish coming in, news drifting both directions at once. Back inside, the baker sets aside the love bread for tomorrow's couple, marks a tally for the temple's revised schedule, and checks the jackal loaf, now cool enough to wrap for the funerary rites at dawn. He stands a moment with his palm on the dome, feeling its heartbeat slow. Heat is a guest, he says. We treat guests well. You think of all the warmth given out today to priests and potters, drummers and donkeys, palace stewards, and spirited children, and realize the ovens are more like hearths in 1,000 homes than machines in a single shop. Before the lamps are snuffed, the head baker fishes a tiny coin from a pouch and presses it into the new flour sack. First measure paid forward to luck. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some shops seeded tomorrow's work with a token, coin, bead, even a painted shard, then hid it again at day's end, a private handshake with fortune. He ties the sack, pats it twice, and nods toward the door. Time to let night do its work. Cooling, settling, ripening. You linger, listening to the last sounds. A paddle set gently against a wall. The faint sigh of the dome. The pap-pap of the broom's final passes. Remember your dopey crocodile for the Pharaohs' table. The reed boat bites. The sesame constellations on the sun disks. Their ghosts seem to hang in the air, a collage of toasty perfume and honey's afterthought. Historians still argue whether scent itself was a deliberate offering. Incense, yes, but bread smell has a kind of ambient devotion. But your lungs, full of warm grain and sweet memory, vote yes without a quorum. The elder woman hands you a small wrapped round, the charm loaf for safe return, and presses her thumb into your palm, a human stamp to match the breads you've marked. The baker holds the door, and the bell on the latch gives its thread-thin note. Street air strokes your face. Distant water answers with a hush. You step out, carrying the day like a warm loaf, heavier than it looks, lighter than you feared, exactly enough. The night leans closer now, and everything softens. The corners of walls, the edges of voices, the bright thoughts that kept time with ovens and market songs. You let the day unspool in longer threads, the pale dawn where flour floated like mist, the steady hands that coaxed bubbles to rise, the quiet pride of loaves shaped into lotus, sun, and the smiling crocodile you'll remember whenever steam touches your face. Even the small disagreements, starter by the door or by the oven, coins or onions, lentils or none, settle into a friendly murmur, like reeds brushing the riverbank when boats drift by too slowly to trouble the water. Your breath follows that hush, deeper in, longer out. Heat becomes warmth. Warmth becomes glow. Glow becomes memory. The cat finds its circle and closes it. The bell on the latch forgets to ring. The dome holds a comfortable silence the way your palms hold the last of the day's softness. Every crumb swept into the pan sounds lighter than the crumb before it. Every step to the doorway feels like moving through warm honey, unhurried, easy, certain. If there's a promise in bread, it is this, that tomorrow asks only for patience and a little kindness, the same way dough asks for time and gentle hands. You picture the starter asleep in its jar, the grain sealed against the night, the stamps tucked into their cloth like children. Somewhere along the river, a lamp draws a golden line across black water. Somewhere beyond the roofs, the first stars rehearse their small, steady brightness. Let the city breathe for you. Let the oven's last sigh become yours. Should a stray thought knock, give it a crust and send it on, friendly and fed. Should a worry whisper, set it beside the door with the sesame coins and let luck keep it company until morning. The bakery will wake again, and you will open your eyes, and warmth will find you. For now, let the quiet rise.
Xin chào quý vị khán giả của kênh Bác sĩ AI. Rất vui được gặp lại mọi người trong một buổi trò chuyện ấm áp và nhiều suy ngẫm. Nếu đây là lần đầu tiên bạn ghé thăm, đừng quên nhận đăng ký kênh để không bỏ lỡ những câu chuyện sâu lắng về nhân sinh, tưởng mệnh và trí tuệ cổ xưa. Trong kho tàng nhân tướng học của Á Đông, đôi mắt luôn được xem là cửa sổ của tâm hồn, nơi phản chiếu rõ nhất những niềm vui, nỗi buồn và cả số phận của một con người. Có những đôi mắt sáng rực như sao mai, báo hiệu một đội thăng hoa, nhưng cũng có những đôi mắt sâu thẳm, mặn mác buồn, ẩn chứa bao câu chuyện chưa kể. Người xưa tin rằng phụ nữ mang đôi mắt buồn thường là người đa cảm, lặng lẽ chịu nhiều sóng gió. Nhưng đằng sau đó, họ còn mang những nét tính cách, vận mệnh và bài học mà ai hiểu được sẽ càng trân trọng hơn. Hôm nay chúng ta sẽ cùng nhau khám phá 5 lời dạy cổ nhân về tưởng phụ nữ có đôi mắt buồn, để từ đó hiểu hơn về họ và cả chính mình. Lời dạy 1. Đôi mắt buồn, dấu ấn của tâm hồn đa cảm lời bàn. Cổ nhân nói, người phụ nữ có đôi mắt buồn thường sinh ra với trái tim nhạy cảm, dễ rung động trước cái đẹp và dễ tổn thương trước bất công. Họ nhìn thế giới không chỉ bằng mắt mà còn bằng trái tim. Câu chuyện: Lễ Hoa, một cô gái vùng quê. Từ nhỏ đã có ánh mắt u buồn như vừa tiễn một mùa thu đi qua. Dù gia cảnh khó khăn, cô vẫn luôn dành thời gian giúp đỡ hàng xóm, chỉ vì thấy người ta khổ mà lòng không yên. Cái đa cầm ấy khiến cô nhiều lần chịu thiệt, nhưng cũng để lại dấu ấn đẹp trong lòng người khác. Bài học: nhạy cảm là món quà, nhưng nếu không biết cân bằng, chính nó sẽ khiến ta mệt mỏi. Hãy học cách yêu thương mà không tự làm tổn thương mình. Lời dạy 2: nỗi buồn trong mắt, ký ức chưa lành. Lợi bàn: trong nhân tướng học, ánh mắt buồn đôi khi là tàn dư của những mất mát hoặc tổn thương từ quá khứ. Chúng in dấu trong tâm hồn, rồi vô thức hiện ra ngoài. Câu chuyện: Mai Hương từng có một tình yêu sâu đậm, nhưng người cô yêu đã ra đi vì bệnh nặng. Từ đó, đôi mắt cô luôn vương nét u hoài. Dù nụ cười vần rằng, nhưng ai tinh ý đều nhận ra một khoảng trống không thể lấp đầy. Bài học: quá khứ không thể thay đổi, nhưng cách ta đối diện mỗi quyết định tương lai. Buông bỏ không phải là quên, mà là học cách mỉm cười với ký ức. Lời dạy 3: ánh mắt buồn, lòng nhân từ hiếm có. Lợi bàn: cố nhân nhận thấy phụ nữ mắt buồn thường có lòng trắc ẩn và dễ đồng cảm. Họ thường trở thành chỗ dựa tinh thần cho người khác bởi họ hiểu thế nào là nỗi đau. Câu chuyện: trong xóm, bà Lan nổi tiếng là người giúp ai cũng nhiệt tình. Khi nghe tin hàng xóm mạt mùa, bà âm thầm gửi gạo và tiễn, chẳng để ai biết. Khi được hỏi lý do, bà chỉ cười: ngày xưa tôi cũng từng nhận ơn, giờ là lúc trả lại. Bài học: thấu hiểu nỗi đau giúp ta trở nên nhân hậu, nhưng lòng tốt cũng cần đi kèm trí tuệ để giúp đúng người và đúng lúc. Lời dạy 4: mắt buồn, nội lực ẩn sâu. Lợi bàn: đừng lầm tưởng rằng người có đôi mắt buồn là yếu đuối. Ngược lại, họ thường có sức chịu đựng bền bỉ, âm thầm vượt qua sóng gió mà không kêu thần. Câu chuyện: Thứ Chàng, một người mẹ đơn thân, ngày làm việc, đêm tranh thủ học thêm để nuôi con. Ánh mắt cô vẫn buồn, nhưng bên trong là ý chí không dễ gì khuất phục. Cô từng nói: buồn thì buồn, nhưng đời mình phải sống cho ra sống. Bài học: nỗi buồn có thể là gánh nặng, nhưng cũng có thể trở thành động lực. Sức mạnh thật sự nằm ở cách ta biến đau thương thành ý chí. Lời dạy 5: ánh mắt buồn, duyên phận đặc biệt. Lời bàn: nhân tướng học cho rằng phụ nữ có đôi mắt buồn thường mang duyên phận nhiều thử thách. Họ có thể gặp nhiều mối tình rạng rỡ trước khi tìm thấy bến đỗ bình yên. Câu chuyện: Cam Tú trải qua 3 lần tình cảm không trọn vẹn. Cô từng nghĩ mình bị sợ cho đến khi gặp người đàn ông đủ bao dung để lắng nghe và yêu thương. Khi đứng trong lễ cưới, cô nói: những nỗi buồn trước đây hóa ra là đường dẫn để tôi tìm được anh. Bài học: mỗi cuộc gặp gỡ và chia ly đều là mảnh ghép tạo nên con người ta hôm nay. Hãy tin rằng mọi thử thách đều là một bước tiến gần hơn đến hạnh phúc. Nếu bạn muốn, tôi có thể viết thêm một phiên bản thứ 2 với giọng kể sâu lắng hơn, đằm chặt radio đêm khuya để tăng cảm xúc và giữ người nghe lâu hơn. Bạn có muốn tôi làm phiên bản đó không?
Bạn có bao giờ tự hỏi, chỉ bằng một ánh nhìn, người xưa có thể đoán được tính cách và cả vận mệnh của một người phụ nữ? Họ tin rằng khuôn mặt chính là tấm gương phản chiếu tâm hồn, và mỗi dáng mặt lại ẩn chứa một câu chuyện rất riêng. Gương mặt tròn đầy với đường viền mềm mại, má căng và sáng như vắng trăng đêm rậm. Những người phụ nữ này thường sinh ra trong môi trường ấm áp. Họ hiền lành, giàu tình cảm và coi trọng gia đình hơn tất cả. Tường số cho thấy cuộc sống của họ thường ít sóng gió, nhưng dễ cả tin, và đôi khi đặt niềm tin sai cho dẫn đến mất mát. Nếu biết cân bằng và chọn đúng người để tin, cuộc đời họ sẽ viên mãn, an nhàn. Về hậu vạn, khuôn mặt trái xoắn, cân đối, thon gọn, trán và cằm hài hòa là chuẩn mực của vẻ đẹp Á Đông. Người phụ nữ sở hữu dáng mặt này thường khéo léo, tinh tế, biết cách cư xử và tạo thiện cảm ngay từ lần gặp đầu tiên. Trong tường số, đây là tường vượng phụ ích tử, dễ mang lại may mắn và sự ổn định cho gia đình. Tuy nhiên, họ thường suy nghĩ nhiều và chính sự cân nhắc quá kỹ đôi khi khiến họ bỏ lỡ cơ hội lớn. Khuôn mặt dài, với đường nét rõ, trán cao, cằm hơi nhọn là dấu hiệu của người nguyên tắc, cầu toàn và kiên định. Những phụ nữ này rất giỏi trong công việc, đặc biệt là những việc đòi hỏi sự tỉ mỉ. Họ có chí tiến thủ và ít khi lùi bước. Theo nhân tướng, đây là tường người, tự gây dựng sự nghiệp. Dù thời trẻ có thể vất vả, nhưng trung niên sẽ thành đạt. Điều họ cần là học cách mở lòng, để cuộc sống thêm phần nhẹ nhàng và ấm áp. Gương mặt vuông, với quai hàm rõ nét, gò má vững chãi, toát lên sự quyết đoán và bản lĩnh. Người phụ nữ này mạnh mẽ, dám nghĩ, dám làm và thường trở thành chỗ dựa tinh thần cho nhiều người. Trong tường số, đây là tường lãnh đạo, có khả năng quản lý tài chính và tổ chức công việc xuất sắc. Tuy nhiên, sự cứng rắn quá mức đôi khi khiến họ bị hiểu nhầm là lạnh lùng và tạo khoảng cách với người thân. Khuôn mặt trái tim, trán rộng, cảm nhó, đường nét thanh thoát là biểu tượng của trí tưởng tượng phong phú và khả năng sáng tạo không giới hạn. Họ thường có nhiều ý tưởng táo bạo và sức hút đặc biệt, dễ khiến người khác nhớ mãi ngay từ lần gặp đầu tiên. Theo nhân tướng, đây là tượng đào hoa, có duyên với người khác rói, nhưng tình duyên đôi khi lận đạn, vì dễ thay đổi cảm xúc và khó gắn bó lâu dài cho đến khi gặp đúng người. Biết thấu hiểu, người xưa tin rằng hình dáng khuôn mặt không chỉ là yếu tố thẩm mỹ mà còn ẩn chứa câu chuyện về tâm hồn và số mệnh. Vậy, bạn thuộc kiểu khuôn mặt nào? Và những lời này đúng với bạn bao nhiêu phần trăm? Hãy chia sẻ để xem có bao nhiêu người giống bạn.